when I joined the squash club at the uni, I didn't give my real name.
Why not? Why not?
Because I wanted to be on the radar slightly, because nobody knew who I was, because I hadn't played juniors.
Barrington name, instant judgment.
I hadn't played juniors, so that's where Joey Barrington came from. I think, ironically, the footballer, but he hadn't he was, hadn't come onto the scene. So it was Joey Barrington for a while. I mean, my real name's Jonah anyway, the same as his, Jonah Paul Barrington, but everyone calls me Joey. So
hold on. Your name's not actually Joey?
No, it's Jonah Paul Barrington.
So yeah, mate, this is it. You ready?
Yeah.
Should we start? Happy to crack into it?
Yeah, let's get stuck in.
Joey, thanks for joining the podcast. You're a man that's very used to being behind the mic.
That's for sure.
Usually asking the questions though, so I hope you don't mind me putting a few to you today.
Not at all. I'll try and open up as much as I can. I can use this as a modern day therapy session.
Growing up in a household, Jonah Barrington, synonymous with the game, godfather of squash, as many people call him. What was it like for you as a kid growing up in that household, following your dad's footsteps?
I've got some really distinct kind of early memories. I mean, I saw him naked a lot. My dad used to parade around the house completely naked after a shower, which was something that I just got used to. So, and then as a sportsman, obviously you see a lot of your other contemporaries naked, but I don't know why I've started with that, but that is something that's come straight into my head. So I was very familiar with my dad from a young age, should I say. But when we were living, growing up in Solihull, so that's where I was born, and we were growing up there. He was training at West Warwick's, and it was a beautiful Queen Anne house. Very lucky to grow up in it was a beautiful house called Lovelace, and he had a gym. It was like an old stable that was converted into a gym. I remember the distinct kind of carpeting, this red and black kind of carpeting in there, and I used to go in, so I would have been probably 4 or 5, probably 4 actually, and I would watch him training in the gym, and I'd sit there for as long as the session was, fascinated by all these different exercises and all the grunting and seeing all his muscles move, because he was incredibly defined and amazing physique on him. For somebody that played a unilateral sport, the symmetry was like Bruce Lee. He was like a bigger version of Bruce Lee, obviously.
Would he still have been at the sort of peak of his powers at this point?
This would have been, I was born in 79, so he would have been in his early 40s, but in incredible shape. So he'd won the Nationals in 1980 when he was 40, so he'd have been like 43, 44. And he was still playing, he was still playing the age groups, which were big back then, the British Opens, but he would be playing the over 35s when he was in his mid 40s and the over 40s. So he would just double up on the age groups. But they used to have massive matches, and there was a lot of great players at that time that were playing very well. Egyptians, ironically, this is really funny. The Egyptians, the male Egyptian players were actually getting better in their older years. So your Ahmed Safwats and Ali Aziz's and Mo Asrans, Mo Khalifa, all these Egyptian players that had kind of come over to England were playing better in their 30s. Whereas obviously in this day and age, you see them coming through as teenagers, early 20s. So that was quite fascinating. And they were some of his big rivals, Abbas Kawood. So they were memories, very early memories, and he'd be running around the garden. I didn't really go down to the squash club at that age in West Warwick's. My older brother did. He's 4 years older than me, and he would go down. So I didn't go. It was not until we kind of moved down to Somerset where I started to go down to the squash club when I was younger, and kind of start hitting a bit of a ball and seeing him on the court doing stuff.
Well, I guess like life at home, squash must have been talked about pretty much all day and night with your dad at the time. Like you sort of absorbed in the game from that very young age.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of was quite independent, so I'd do those things like watching him training and stuff and be fascinated with that, and then I'd go off and play with my knights and get up to mischief. I was a nightmare for just getting up to stuff. I'd suddenly appear on the roof of the house or something. I just would go off in my own little world and I was quite self-sufficient in that way, even though I was the younger brother. But we had a lot of visitors. Yeah, so a lot of players staying, a lot of people passing through, a lot of visitors. My mum was continually feeding and cooking, and so that was when there'd be the discussions, probably later at night, when I was meant to be in bed, where they're, you know, after the day's training and stuff, my dad would be talking with the players and stuff. But I have some funny memories of being chased around the house, actually in Solihull again by Rodney Isles with a kind of this like a bamboo bin on his head, going oogie oogie oogie, chasing me around. So I had quite a lot of fun. There were some characters down there. In the later years, Peter Marshall came down a lot. Simon Park used to just go into our fridge and just help himself all the time. Very familiar.
But never any pressure from your dad to kind of pick up the racket?
No, not at all. On the complete opposite, really. He, you know, I would be going down. I'd start doing some solo when I was younger, and I was kind of getting into it at quite a young age. But I was fascinated by my team sports. So I'd go down the club and I'd solo, and I'd be quite meticulous with bits and pieces. But I only played a couple of tournaments at a very young age, and then I completely stopped playing any national tournaments or anything substantial. I was off playing cricket, and I was running, and
because you were a decent level in cricket, right?
Yeah, so cricket was my main sport as a kind of early teenager, and I was offered a contract with Somerset County Cricket Club when I was 16 to do an apprenticeship. So I looked at leaving school to go there at 16 to just play cricket. And then I was a fast bowler and a batsman, left-handed batsman and a fast bowler, opening bowler. I used to love coming off about 22 paces. And I injured my back, and I went back and did my A-levels. And academically, I was never perceived as anything special at school. I found out I was dyslexic later on, but for me, the A-levels is where I came into my own, because I got to pick my subjects that I was interested in, history and biology and those things. And I did very well in my A-levels, which was a complete surprise to the teachers at the school, really.
So the cricket's kind of the sporting outlet. Squash at this point in time is not really in
No,
in your life?
so the only bit of squash that I would do from that teenage period was what was called the national schools, which all the schools would play a competition, and I would represent Millfield in that whatever level. So 4 in the team, 3 in whatever it was. I wouldn't play any squash through the summer from the age of, from when I started. So I started playing when I was about probably 7 or 8, and then never ever played squash through the summer. I was always kind of playing cricket, and that happened through my teenage period. So I would just play a bit of squash a couple of times a week, just at Millfield for the national schools, but not competing and doing any of the junior circuit or anything like that. The last junior tournament I played, I was, I think 10 years old, which was a nationals, under 12. And
What was your dad the coach at Millfield at that point as well?
Not officially. So he was, but he wasn't officially there. He was still
This is before the academy and everything?
This was before the Millfield Academy. There was always a tradition. When he moved down in 1985 to Somerset from Solihull, he moved down because of the school. My older brother was boarding. They didn't want him boarding, and a house came up, but the house that he still resides in now came up in one of those lovely Country Life magazines, and right by Glastonbury Tor, and they went for it and they got it. We moved down very quickly. And he started helping out at the school, because my brother was at the prep school, and he started helping out at the senior school just in his own free time. And then players started coming down to the school. So you had Angus Kirkland and Ross Bryant, who came down. Now, Ross Bryant's the father of Jonah Barrington.
Yeah.
So he came down. They came down as boarders, and Peter Marshall came down because my dad was there. And then more players started coming. This was way before any academy, because they wanted to get coaching with my dad, and it was right on the doorstep. Go to a very good school. So there was an academy, but it was an unofficial academy, and he was still coaching for free there. But at the time, he was director of excellence for what was now England Squash, the SRA.
Yeah.
And he had he was contracted with Dunlop as well at that time. So he was doing road shows, exhibitions, traveling with the England team to the Europeans, Worlds. He was busy. We never saw him. National squads. He was doing all the national squads. He set up that whole system.
Yeah. And the fact that you didn't play junior squash, was that more sort of your decision, not really wanting to go down that route, or was it the kind of, did you get a lot of the he's going to be good because he's Jonah's son type of comments.
Yeah. No, I heard it. I remember hearing a very distinctive. It was the last national championships that I played under 12 when I was 10. And I kind of did quite well. I ended up losing in the semis to John Russell, who won the under 12s for the first time at that time. And there was another player in the final on the other side called Daniel Lofthouse. It was a very good level of squash. John Russell was a superb junior and went into pros for a bit. And I lost to him. I had no, wasn't playing any events or anything. So I did quite well to get to the semis. And I was standing there and these parents were talking and I was just next to them and they just kind of were saying, well, of course he was going to get quite far in the tournament because, he's Jonah Barrington's son. He's basically born with a silver spoon in his mouth. And I remember like going up to my dad about 10 minutes afterwards and just saying, I don't want to be around here. And I made my decision right there, right then. I didn't want to be around that junior circuit at all.
Mm. Well, was that a little bit of a sort of wanting to get out of the shadow of your dad a bit as well as a kid?
I don't know. I mean, yes and no. I felt it. I felt quite confused growing up because our phone would be going all the time. Like the parents of children have absolutely no understanding of my dad's personal life, and just it was quite rude. They'd ring up on evenings. And my dad would always take these blooming calls.
These would be kids he'd be coaching or be involved with.
The parents, they're in overdrive, all these parents. I mean, I could list off names, just remember the names, because my mum would answer the phone and she just got less and less, she just got so tired of it. And they'd ring up at night time wanting, to chomp my dad's ear off, and he never said no. The amount of time he spent with other people's children was a joke. And I can hold my hands up and go, well, he never spent any time with me and my brother, which he didn't. But that was just the way it was. That was the cards that we had, dealt at that time. And he was off, with other people's, spending time with other people's children, doing the juniors and obviously the senior stuff as well. So that was the deal.
That was got to be quite difficult though as a kid, especially given what he's achieved in a sport, and you're a sport nut.
Yeah.
Wanting to go down that route and have your own success, but trying to follow in the footsteps of somebody who's achieved, he's synonymous with the game of squash. That's a heavy burden to carry as a kid, especially if he's not around.
Yeah, it affected my brother a lot. My older brother, who played a couple of British Junior Opens, was a very, very good squash player, incredibly talented and very, very good, but he was a lot more sensitive than me. It affected him a lot. And, going down the cricket route was a good outlet, but I liked team sports. I enjoyed the team sports. I wasn't, as much as I was self-sufficient, I could go and play on my own and get up to stuff on my own. I loved being in that team environment. So I'm so pleased that I had that experience of playing all that, because people always say to me, well, if you'd have started earlier, you could have been a lot higher. And I think, well, if I started earlier, I might not have even been playing any pro squash, because I could have been completely fed up with it all. Yeah,
because by the time you're a late teenager and you're in the cricket scene, the next thing is university. So the idea of going pro wasn't there at all, because you went to uni in Birmingham, right?
Went to Birmingham. I literally at that point I'd kind of, the cricket, I hurt myself. I then retracted into my studies, which was great. So I kind of then took this other path, this small path on my studies, nailed my A-levels, loved my A-levels, nailed them, got to Birmingham Uni, which is, my dad was incredibly proud of me. I remember he was coaching in Holland at the time. After he lost his job, they got rid of him in England. He lost his job, which was brutal in the early 90s, which to this day I can never get my head around. It was just awful. And they got rid of him and he was replaced, and he didn't have any work for a while. And then he ended up getting a job in Holland. So he would have to go there 2 weeks every month for years. And this was through when I was 13, 14, 15. So you can see, so he would have been away in Holland. He was heavily arthritic with the first hip, and he was miserable as hell. He'd gone from working with these amazing elite players, and this is no disrespect to the Dutch squash at that time, but they didn't have any type of level of player. And then he was able to bring Tommy Burden, who had a talent for the game, through as a very, very high junior into pros. Vanessa was obviously there, so she got to experience him being there, and he ended up getting the Dutch women to a very good, I think they finished maybe third in the Europeans one year out of nowhere, and got the Dutch men up, and he'd done a great job there, and a lot of people were coming and going. But I didn't see him for 2 weeks every month during that period. I had no idea of squash wasn't even on my radar. I remember when I did my A-levels, I went to Birmingham, rang him up, tell him I've got into Birmingham. I got 2 A's and a B. and he was, couldn't be prouder. He
Yeah.
always gave me, he never watched any of my cricket matches really. My mum always used to take me and watch, but he always gave me some really nice words and encouragement, and showed when he was proud. It was never none of that.
Yeah. And what did you study?
I did sport and exercise science. So I was getting really fascinated by that side, because I'd kind of studied biology in A level and the personal training. I was getting into the gym myself. So I was doing quite a lot of gym work and weights and things even back then. And I remember writing a list of things I might want to do. And the idea of owning my own gym with the full Monty of physios and nutrition. And the course at that time, because it was so scientific, because it was the sport and exercise science rather than the Loughborough course that was a bit more driven towards PE teacher, it was a bit more old school in terms of the sports science. This was more scientific and more innovative. And so
that would have been the very early days of sort of sports science coming in at the elite level of sports as well. Yeah,
it was, but it was incredibly scientific, and I loved it for a period. There. And then started getting a bit bored.
I'm going to read an article, because university seems to have been a pivotal moment for you.
It was.
There's a headline from an article, I think from about 2005, and it says, with his poster boy good looks, flowing blonde mane, and muscular 6-foot frame.
I wasn't a male gigolo, by the way, although it could have been good money.
Joey Barrington is the epitome of the elite modern day sportsman. But he could have thrown it all away during a drink and drug binge at university. By his own admission, he could have killed himself. Tell me a bit about that. What was going on?
It was quite. It's not funny, because it's a lot of people get themselves in a terrible tangle, and it's not funny. But I had got to university. I'd had a very nice upbringing, lovely upbringing in the countryside. Went to an amazing school at Millfield, which was I pretty much majority of the time, and really enjoyed it there. And then went to Birmingham, and I had a lot of freedom at home. I used to have a cider when I was 13 after my cricket. I'd come home and have one of these woodpecker ciders. I remember, and Mum would have a glass of wine. Dad was obviously away, and we'd just chill out and watch the TV, and she was good as gold. So it was none of this kind of like, you can't drink in the house or this weird until you're a certain age. And then I got to Birmingham, and I think the course of that time, it was, the first year, it's quite kind of, it's not particularly interesting in the first year. And I was just in a city in Birmingham, which was getting pretty trendy at that time. The university itself was cool, like the campus was lovely. And I just kind of went a bit rogue and just, wanted to go out and have fun and do it in that way. And I was drinking a lot, because it was that extreme attitude. I always had the extreme attitude of, well, I'm going to keep, drinking until, the early hours of the morning and so on. And I was missing lectures, and they called me in to say, look, Mr. Barrington, you're not appearing at any of these lectures, and you look awful. I think you might need to speak to someone. So I did, because I didn't really have a choice. That was part of what the faculty at that time, they're like, if you want to stay on the course, we need you to speak to someone,
It got that extreme that it was almost sort of...
Yeah, I was missing, I was just, because I was hungover, and I'd had such a outrageous night. And so I had this session with a therapist, and they'd kind of asked me if, started going into my upbringing, and I just said, it's nothing to do with my upbringing. It's like, I'm not drinking because my father didn't, spend any time with me, or, I had a really happy upbringing. I'm just kind of at a crossroads where I'm trying to find myself a little bit, and it's quite exciting going out with all these young people and obviously girls and all that stuff, and in a city. You're in
you've come from the countryside, the middle of nowhere,
country
to the
bumpkin.
center.
Country bumpkin. So ironically, the kickstart for me changing my attitude was I went down to Edgebaston Priory, which was just down the road from the university. So I was living very close to it, and I watched a National League match with Del Harris playing for Priory. He's playing Mark Cairns. And I was just completely blown away by what Del Harris was doing. Like, it's big, he was like a decathlete, different body type to the normal squash players, like this tall, broad, powerful player. on the glass back court at the Priory, and I was like, wow, this is seriously cool. And it triggered something. And that was one of the main triggers that kind of snapped me out of doing something and actually started to play squash again at uni. But when I joined the squash club at the uni, I didn't give my real name.
Why not?
Because I wanted to be on the radar slightly, because nobody knew who I was, because I hadn't played juniors.
Barrington name, instant judgment.
I hadn't played juniors, so that's where Joey Barrington came from. I think, ironically, the footballer, but he hadn't he was, hadn't come onto the scene. So it was Joey Barrington for a while, and the coach at the time was a guy called Dave Edwards, who was from Worcestershire, who had no idea. So I kind of went about my business, and then somehow he found out. I don't know how, and he found out, and then he was, and that was whatever. It didn't change anything, but we had a real giggle about it, because I must have got away with it for about 4 months, 5 months.
Do you think your experience starting back in squash would have been different had people known your surname?
Maybe. I don't know. I don't think so. I just wanted I was crap. I hadn't played for ages.
Yeah.
I was playing 4 in the Midland League team at Edgebaston Priory. I mean, and then 18 months later, I'm on the PSA, on the PSA World Tour. I mean, it's ridiculous, really. Like, the change in my level was a joke. But I was crap to start with, because I hadn't played properly. And I was really unfit because I'd been drinking a lot and, other things. And I needed to clean myself out. And that was the kickstart. So I then became very, very obsessed very quickly, and wanted to get my course over and done with and get playing squash. And that's kind of...
Was the fact that you were doing a sports science degree kind of actually beneficial in that scenario then?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, definitely. It was. I got fascinated by it. In fact, my dissertation, I got published in the International Journal of Sports Nutrition, and it was the effects of creatine supplementation on competitive squash players, and it was brilliant, and it was a positive effect, and I loved doing it. It was so cool, and we were lucky at the time, because by the time I got to my 3rd year, Birmingham started getting on the map a bit with the squash. I started to improve. There was a few people. There was a guy called John Diath, who was a good junior that was local from that area, and a few other players, and we were basically the 2nd best university team behind UWIC, which was Cardiff Institute, which was Mike Hughes, senior, had started that. Stafford Murray was heavily involved in that, and they were giving these massive scholarships to all these squash players to get a university degree.
Yeah.
They were the beginning of all the scholarships in the UK, Cardiff Institute. And then we had a few players that were decent juniors that were coming in, that were my age, that started to come in having year outs and then coming into Birmingham. And then we started gathering momentum with the quality of the team, which I captained in the end. We linked to Edgebaston Priory, and I got sponsorship for the team. When I think about the commercial side, I'd set up this sponsorship where we were having all our hotels paid. They'd rent us 2 cars for the team. We'd go off and play these BUSA matches in different parts of the country, stay in these hotels, and we got extra coaching, and we got kit, and everything was all paid for by Bob Molden. It was Leisure Care Promotions, who was heavily involved at the Priory, and I sorted out the contract with that. So yeah, that's where the commercial side comes from.
There's a sort of odd symmetry there, because in your dad's book he talks about being a student in Dublin, almost I think he did get kicked out of university for drinking.
Yeah, he did, yeah.
And then he finds squash, commits himself to it, and it sort of is the redemption of his
weird.
story.
It's very odd,
you've almost exactly the same story.
It's really weird. His story was, he was he was incredibly intelligent, went to university 2 years too young. He went at 16 to Trinity and was drinking like an absolute lunatic, having great fun. And he got thrown out because he threw a load of flour over this famous Hungarian professor that was doing a lecture. But he wasn't meant to get him, he was meant to get his friend. And he was very drunk, ran in, and that was it. That was the last warning, and they got rid of him, and he was back home. He was kicked out of Trinity, and typical, as you know, typical Irish style, was then invited back as an honorary doctorate of law, which I attended with him in the early 2000s, which was an amazing experience for both of us. But yeah, really weird how it kind of aligned with that kind of that side of things. And when you look back and you see the similarities, there are very, very similar circumstances in terms of that. But then obviously he went on to become 6 times British Open champion, the only person to transcend squashing that's ever been. And I did all right. I played at decent level and did okay.
What did he say to you whenever you told him you were going to go pro?
He didn't take me seriously initially. He was like, "Oh, we'll see about that," kind of thing. I rang him up to tell him, and he kind of said, "Oh, we'll see about that." And then he started hearing murmurings that I was training hard and down at the club and doing these different extra things and doing this. And then he started taking it very seriously. And then he was incredibly supportive after that. Incredibly supportive. So from that side, I stayed at Birmingham to do a master's because I wanted to, the setup there was good. I'd got a very good setup that I'd managed to create with Priory, and there were players there. It was a good area to be in for leagues, going off. So I stayed there, and then I needed to upscale everything. And we decided we had 2 options to go try Pontefract with Malcolm, or at the time Chingford with Neil Harvey and Peter Nicol. And I went for Chingford because at that point it probably would have suited me a little bit more because of the physicality that I wanted. I'd have probably got quite frustrated with this, like, ironically, the ball control is what I needed, which I would have got from Pontefract, and the understanding of the game and technique a bit more, and finding my way in terms of that. But I probably would have lost patience because of the kind of stationary drills that are the bread and butter of Pontefract. So I went to Chingford, which was a hardcore stable of training. It was brutal, absolutely brutal. And originally I thought I wasn't going to be able to deal with it because my hip was in agony from the first couple of weeks, because I'd never trained twice a day, let alone squash specific twice a day, which was what you were doing at these as a professional.
Yeah.
And I remember ringing my dad up and saying that my body can't take it. I can't. I think I've got an arthritic hip already. And he kind of said, "Look, it will settle down. Your body's adapting." This is how the crazy thing about what your body can put up with, like the natural anti-inflammatories. So everything was inflamed. I was really uncomfortable. I was in a tangle. I thought, God, my body's not going to let me do it. I was 21 at the time, and then it started to. I went and got an X-ray to make sure it wasn't any kind of cartilage. The pelvis was fine. And then it started to accept the training, and then I just absolutely caned it. It was like a monster, and I got strong very quickly for my level.
The physical side of the game, it's still the bit that you kind of seem to admire the most in commentary, which we'll get to in a bit, but the physical side of the game's the bit that then you kind of latched onto, the pain of being on court.
Yeah, it was again, I look back and, and I'm there analysing with the commentary and seeing these players, and I started to understand the game so much better later on, which is typical, like really understand it later on towards the real end of my career when I was getting some injuries, and, with ball control and accuracy and understanding the game more and reading players more, because I had no background of reading players and styles because I didn't play for that long period of time as a kid. Before I went pro, my biggest event was the British Universities. I'd played that one when I was at the national championships when I was 10, or 10 and 10 and a half in Telford. And then the next biggest event I played was when I was 19, and it was 19 and a half, and it was the BUSA, the British University Championships, up at Heriot-Watt in Edinburgh, playing Paul Allen in the final there, and I lost out to him. But I mean, that is crazy. And then I went pro. I had no background whatsoever. It was a joke.
What gave you the belief then that you could actually give the pro ranks a crack? If you haven't had that background, if you haven't had that junior success, if you've got...
I was improving at a rate, when I look at my rankings and stuff, but I was improving on a domestic level. So I went from the Midland League at number 4, and I was improving like crazy. I won the Edgebaston Priory Club Championships, which I'm very proud of. We've got my name on the board.
I presume your dad's name would have been up there too.
He
was
didn't
based
play
in it?
well.
No?
Yeah, he didn't play the club championships, but obviously British Opens and stuff. But it's obviously the initial J Barrington. I mean, my real name's Jonah anyway, the same as his, Jonah Paul Barrington. But everyone calls me Joey. So
Hold on. Your name's not actually Joey?
no, it's Jonah Paul Barrington. Yeah, Jonah Paul Barrington. So
And Joey's just been a nickname that stuck?
just to kind of to differentiate
Yeah.
between the two. So it suited me really, Joey. It's quite a kind of cheeky, mischievous name. But yeah, so that was, so I was improving a lot, and I just got really obsessed with it. And the BSPAs and these kind of very local, there were so many good players obviously in the UK at that time. There was loads and loads and loads. So you were kind of getting a bit, you'd have these PSA players playing in these BSPAs, getting a gauge of where you're about. I just, that's all I wanted to do then. That was it. I was on a mission to do it.
And you got up to, was it 24? Was your highest?
24, and I got there ridiculously quickly. When I look at the rankings, I got there in under 2.5 years. And then I stayed there, and I plateaued, and I stayed there. And there were a couple of, ifs and buts, but there was a couple of kind of career-changing situations that didn't work out in South America remember a particular match with Peter Barker, where the winner of that match went on to win the tournament. It was in the semi-finals, and whoever won between me and him, I had match balls, and I ended up losing 12-10 in the fifth in Bogota, and we were kind of in the same ranking area, and that was a stepping stone, and that was a big opportunity miss for me, which I still think about. He went on to win the tournament. I'd have gone on and won that tournament on that side, and the points kind of elevated you into top 16. But when I look at the names of the players that were during my period, it was pretty impressive. The guys that were from 1 to 15 were pretty, I mean, they'd all been, a lot of them had been former British Open champions, world number ones, I mean, it was a stack. I was in a very strong period, which was great. The golden age kind of, which then I was able to then commentate on for quite a long time.
Yeah.
But you look at the names of all those English players, your Will Strops, Nick Matthews, Lee Beachels,
Nicol,
Parky was still playing, Peter Nicol was still playing, Jonathan Power was, Palmer, Thierry Linku, Kareem Darwish, Amir Shabana, Rami then was coming in. The Aussies, with Stuart Boswell, Anthony Ricketts. I mean, you name them all, you could say, well, he got there, he won this, he won that. So it was a very strong period.
I mean, if you still have that memory of Bogota, did you get the most out of yourself? Are there regrets that could you have achieved more? Or
I probably could have done with working on the psychological side, because I got incredibly nervous. That was my Achilles heel, was my nerves. I got incredibly nervous. I wouldn't sleep well the night before matches, and I got really nervous. And I'd attribute that to, again, not having that rehearsal of playing through the junior period. There's certain things that you can't kind of tune into necessarily if you haven't been there and done that to the extreme that I did with not playing competitively through all those years. And I got very nervous. I was pretty good with my cricket. I never got nervous with that, but I was very nervous with the squash, and that was my Achilles heel. And then I got sidetracked as well. I started building my house, which became something of an obsession again, which I spent more time kind of doing the labor on that at one point than I should have been training at one point. So anyway, it's all ifs and buts, but I think I could have definitely got quite a bit higher, even with the road that I took, than I did.
Like, do you have regrets about not getting the most out of yourself in that sense?
I don't know. I mean, from the training, so even when I was building my house, would always get the training in. So it wasn't like I wasn't training. The training I loved, like the training part of it. If you could be a professional trainer, that would be my ultimate. Being paid to just train twice a day. It's like, well, are you training hard? What, God, he's training brutally and we're paying for it. That would be my ultimate. In fact, I should try and invent something like that. But it was the competition. What I did love were the leagues. So I loved the team. So I would get some big results in leagues around Europe and stuff because I loved that team.
The pressure's not just on you as an individual.
Yeah, but it was just because they were, I don't know, because they were expecting you, because it's not just the pressure's not just on you sharing with the team, it's you're representing yourself and other people, which goes back to my cricket and the sports growing up team.
Yeah.
So the team stuff, I got some really big results as well, you know, doing those and the leagues. I really enjoyed the leagues. I played a lot of leagues, but they had a knock-on effect of injuries because you're traveling, you're tired, you're coming in from flights, going off, playing, you know, that started to cause problems for my body as well. I was kind of overplaying the leagues, whereas now the players have got so many tournaments that they can barely get any leagues in, and they don't need to because they've got so many events and they're earning a lot more money obviously as well.
Yeah. When then does commentary come into the picture?
I had done, so when I was in fully fledged playing, there was this, it was called PSA Live. So it was basically a chat, Adrian Battersby traveling with a modem around the world, just with a modem, plug it in and stream squash. So that was being streamed in the kind of around 2007 and 8. It might have been a bit earlier, I can't remember. And he would pay £25 for players to commentate with him, because he was just talking. He didn't know anything about squash, so he'd be there talking away, and then a player would come in and commentate with him. So I did a few of those, which I really enjoyed. And then one of the people at the time couldn't. I think Chris Robertson. It was either Chris Robertson or Robert Edwards. Couldn't. They were doing the commentary for the highlight shows for Sky, and it was done at this place just north of Bristol, around Gloucestershire area, and one of them couldn't do it, and I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been Chris Robertson. I can't remember. It was one of the two, and I randomly was asked to do it, and I did it, and it went down quite well. And I thought, you know what, this is quite cool. And then suddenly, with the change of guard in the PSA, with Gwaine Briers going, Alex Goff coming in, and Lee Beachall, they wanted to own the PSA side of the TV, not have somebody come in from the outside like PSA Live, and actually own it. And they started talking about, you know, a squash TV, which is owned by the PSA at that time, and that they created that. And I was asked if I would be interested in commentating.
You were still on tour, still competing.
Yeah. So we did the pilot December 2009 from quarterfinals onwards for Squash TV at the World Championships in Saudi Arabia, which Rami won, epic battle with Nick Matthew. And that's when we did the pilot. I played in there. I did all right. I think got through a few rounds, and then we went live in January. And that was just a joke, because it was me being the main person and then getting people in and playing. So I would be in tournaments. I was still to this day think, you know, and people, you hear all this stuff on social media about draws being fixed and this, that, and everything else. But it started to get very, there was a pattern where basically I'd either play Rami Ashour, #1 in the world, or Nick Matthew, the #2 in the world, in these draws. And I was thinking, I think that, you know, I might be getting cut out straight away so that I could be on the commentary mic. But that happened far too regularly. But yeah, and that happened for a couple of years, and that was going on for a couple of years. So I was doing the both, and then it got to the stage where I wasn't, you know, improving. I was getting into my mid-30s and getting injuries, and I just thought this is a good opportunity to you know, do it full time.
Almost the perfect timing for you towards the end of the career. A new opportunity comes along, but was it, even in that early 2009, 2010 phase, did you see it as something that could be kind of where we are today? It's, you know, something long term?
Yes, I thought maybe a bit, and then go on to other sports, maybe. But then I just got so engrossed with it all that, you know, I found that side of things a lot easier. So the commentating, the presenting, you get an adrenaline rush, but I don't get never get the nerves like I was getting when I was playing in big matches and things on the PSA, like the beforehand. I mean, the nerves, I mean, I just don't, and it became very natural for me. So it just, again, by chance, finding something that was my niche, really. I mean, my dad had commentated, and he's a great speaker, and would have grown up with that vocabulary, also with a lot of effing and blinding going on, which I've inherited, which I hold my hands up, which is not great, but I can't help it, and it is there. Luckily not on air, because that would be it. But you know, that side of things. And also with the dyslexic side, your kind of brain works in different ways, because I don't read from an iPad or do all of that. It's kind of ad hoc and from memory, or just as it is. I don't write stuff down and then read from there. You know, a lot of presenters, Michael Absalom, for instance, you know, he's got his big cards, the eyes behind.
You've sort of established yourself now, though, as you know, we could almost say your dad was sort of the engine of the early professional era. You're sort of the voice of the modern era, that you're established now. As if you maybe have some regrets about your playing days, are you quite proud about where you are within the game now at the minute?
Yeah, big time. I mean, I really, you know, I put a lot of effort and time into this. I've done a lot, and, you know, I had to battle against quite a lot as well. You know, the nickname scenario was something I wanted to bring in early doors, and I was told by the hierarchy that absolutely not. No chance, no way, we don't want you doing that. And, you know, things just, I've made it, you know, there's a stamp on it and there's a style to it. And I watched a lot of sport growing up. I watched a lot of sport, and I was lucky enough to watch and hear all those amazing commentators in the cricket with your Richie Benos, and then he was, you know, incredibly charming, but he never offended anyone. Incredibly charming, amazing commentator. But then you had the you know, the funnier ones as well, that were a bit more on the edge, and the banter between sports people. And there was a lot of, you know, through rugby and football and all those kind of things, hearing a lot of the sports and absorbing all of that, and the athletics commentary. And I listened to a lot and watched a lot. We watched a lot of sport growing up on TV at home. Of course we did. You know, my mum was a terrific runner. I mean, she was an amazing athlete. So we watched all the athletics. And
yeah, your mum, just to touch on that, your mum competed middle distance English championships.
Incredible. Yeah, I've just been finding out even more info more recently. I was telling you about what she achieved she was extraordinary what she did, from 400 meters all the way up to cross country, and what she won, and European champion cross country, a couple of times British champion cross country, youngest woman to run under 5 minutes for the mile. She was 19 in the race that Diana Leather smashed the 5 minute mile by, she ran 4:50. Mum was about 4:56. She was 19 at that time. If they'd had properly the 1500 meters at the Olympics at the time that she was in, so it wasn't brought in till the 70s, I think, early 70s. You wouldn't believe it when you look at the distances. She would have done incredibly well. She would have probably got a medal. She was a brilliant runner, amazing. So that I've been finding out more and more stuff more recently, and seeing footage of her, which is pretty amazing. So, you know, that was my background, and I read a lot as a kid as well. So it was a nightmare reading, because I had to read every page about 3 times because of dyslexia. But strangely, when I used to have some alcohol, that seemed to straighten everything out. But yeah, so it kind of finding that area, and it was a blank canvas with Squash TV. Blank canvas. The filming of squash had been so poor in the past. You'd had Sean Dellier doing a wonderful job in the Canadian, who was filming the glass courts and trying to really innovate with cameras, and he was
Sean Dellier. And Sean Dellier, the player?
His dad, Jean. His dad. So Sean's father, Jean Dellier, his original filming of squash, even from the early 80s, was very, very good and very innovative. And he was a real catalyst for trying to get cameras into it and show it in a different way. He's you can find footage of he was really very cool, his outlook. Completely wacky, which you'd expect, but really, really good. And he was on it, and you could see the potential of what could be done, and then understanding the cameras, and obviously everything's with technology getting better and better. And now you see it's just such a spectacle. It's unbelievable what you can do with it.
I guess there's a lot of excitement then in that aspect of being able to be part of building that, growing that, taking that from sort of zero to where we are today.
Yeah, and you know, I fought heavily to be in the production side of it. and I have an involvement in the production side of it, which I love. I really do like that side. That stimulates me more. Don't get me wrong, I really enjoy the commentary. I've done a lot of matches. The studio work is great. It's lovely to cross over and do both and have that. I find that a very cool skill to have, and I'm seeing more of these kind of sports pundits that are doing that as well. That can present, they can commentate, they can interview and do these things, and I like that crossover, not to just be pigeonholed in one area. It's like, you're a commentator or you're a presenter, you can, if you've got the skill set to do both, it's quite nice to chop and change. But then the production side of the bigger picture of what we've been doing the last couple of years, I've loved that. I've loved that side to try and paint these stories throughout the tournaments and see what might happen and look at it from the outside in a bit more, and it's really exciting. And I feel that the product is superb, with obviously the level of the playing, but also what we output is great. It's really good.
Are there areas where you think the product, the TV product, can be improved at the minute?
I would say, you can always add a few extra cameras in, and personnel. Personnel for me, the quick editing and having people to turn around stuff. I've been lucky enough to experience the extreme side of sports TV, the Commonwealth Games, where I have to say you get a bit of the smoke and mirrors effect, because it is a monster. You're looking at a crew of 34 people for the squash, HB trucks and, the whole shebang, and a lot of people also standing around doing nothing. And then from our side, as you well know, the output of what we do with the personnel that we have is massive. But adding a few extra bits in there, not going overboard with those of other people, but just I love the kind of, for me, to get to the viewers, they see the squash, but I want them seeing a bit more of the behind the scenes and getting an understanding, if they're not lucky enough to get to an event, getting an understanding of the event, the setup, the players, the nitty gritty, the stuff when it could kick off with certain situations, and getting that on camera and getting it out and getting that across, because that's the rawness of the game that a lot of the viewers don't get to see.
Yeah, of course.
And so you would need personnel there with gimbals, which we have, but maybe one and two others, and then editing around, getting that edit in and around and turn around into the program and stuff. So a few of those, but I'm, I think we're in a really good place. And
it sounds, from what you're saying, you kind of feel that the product you're involved in at the minute is maybe punching above its weight to a certain extent with the staff numbers. How do you feel then when you get the sort of criticism on the socials, whether it's of your style or your commentating or the product and that? How do you handle that side of it?
I mean, it's more and more. Social media was around when I was starting off. Everyone's got an opinion on everything. They don't obviously have a clue. I mean, I get the funny messages when Squash TV goes down, unfortunately, when it does. And then I get these messages from random people, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, or any of the platforms, basically it's like, it's my fault. I should be, they think I'm the engineer as well. And the frustrations with that side of things. And then, it's just obviously the understanding of what people do. And in this day and age, you're in a situation where you have people that will watch the sport not for the enjoyment of the sport, but to see if a commentator or a presenter or a player steps out of line, and then they jump on them, on social media. It's not for the pure enjoyment of what you're watching. And obviously what you say in this day and age can be maneuvered into so many different areas of that's offensive or this, that, and then you've got to be so careful. So you're there to entertain, but yet you have to also be very aware of the world that we live in, and that's incredibly tough. And that's a big skill set to be able to try and get the balance with all of that. I'm never going to be able to do the commentary that I do, and certain people that don't like what I do, I'm not going to be able to change them. That's their opinion. That's the way they are, and that's that's up to them. And if I'm going to take that, I'd like to think that the majority of people that watch it and really enjoy what I do, and that's what I've got to kind of focus on. Really, there's always going to be people that are not going to like you or whatever, and you can't do anything about it. It is what it is, and that's I just try and get on with what I need. I look for the constructive criticism and then try and improve on certain things. I mean, you've got to keep improving and keep trying to better yourself.
Yeah, because especially when you've done hundreds and hundreds of hours of squash, how do you keep it fresh? You're known for the odd cliched line.
Yeah.
Tired.
Yeah. There's the squash. Yeah. There's a bit of squash slang in there, and as we move forward, with the Olympics, if that's going to be the platform, getting the balance of the excitement factor and the squash terminology, but also the simpleness of Joe Bloggs that's never watched squash before.
Because there's a balance between educating the new fan
Big time.
and entertaining
talking about things like the hold and all these things. I mean, what, if somebody that doesn't play, I mean, what, talking about the hold, what's this hold? You've got the intricacies with squash of somebody behind you. You're on a court with someone. You're on a court in tennis and badminton and table tennis. You're in an area, but you're opposite. It's very obvious. The translation is obvious of what's happening. You're opposite. It's very simple to follow. Squash, you've got somebody in your space, like behind you. You go into the front. You've got shots that your opponent, you don't know where they are. At least with the other racket sports, you know exactly where they are because you're seeing them all the time.
Yeah.
So the commentary of tennis, they decide not to commentate during the rally, which I don't always think is, I think at times that probably could be quite cool, but that's what the format that they choose to do, and then they comment afterwards. In squash, you've got these rallies going along for such a long period of time, and particularly when you think down the backhand wall, where Joe Bloggs could come and watch that and think, this is really weird. Why are they going down this wall like this? And there's a whole court open and not doing anything. So the intricacies of squash are so much more. There's so much more subtlety with the chess-like scenario and the deception and not seeing where your opponent is, and then having your opponent in your personal space like you're in a boxing ring. That needs to be translated through. And then the other side of the coin is obviously the excitement factor, which has been my, I just get wrapped up in those matches that are so brilliant. And if you're on site by the crowd and you can hear the crowd and you're getting that atmosphere, I go into like South American football commentator, but I can't help that, and I wouldn't change that.
If you don't get the nerves the same way when you were playing, it sounds like you still get the buzz.
Oh, I get the buzz, and that's difficult to deal with. The aftermath is hard.
What do you mean?
When you have done those live, particularly when we do the TV side of things with the studio shows, when you're under a lot of pressure, you've got people in your ear talking, counting down to adverts, counting down to going off air. You've got your co-presenters talking. You've got all these things going on that you're having to process what you're saying, switching all that off, which I tend to do pretty well. Is coming off those matches that have been absolute humding belters, you then sign off and it's done. And it's all quiet, it's done, and your adrenaline's like that. It's usually late at night as well, and it's very hard to settle down. And you have a low. Whatever goes up has to come down, and you have a very big mental low, flattening that can last a couple of days, and that's very difficult to deal with. I'm always aware of it now, and that helps, but it's hard because you're there screaming your head off and having excitement, and then suddenly you don't want to speak to anyone, and that's difficult when you've got family, and that is the hard part of it, and that's what people don't see. It's you're so you see all so jovial and so happy on commentary and all these things, and it's like, well, there's stuff in personal life, like in anything, people dying, things happening, and the frequency of doing the events, there's a lot of travel in it as well. So that's a lot, and that's really difficult to deal with, and that's where having a beer or something, not to the extent where I'm at university, that's for sure, but you need to wind down.
Yeah,
you need to wind down and balance out, and then so it's a wonderful job. It's a brilliant job. I'm very thankful to be doing it, and it's the next best thing to playing, being there talking about it, and I love it. I maybe I could have or go into other sports, but I do love where we're at with it, and I love what I do. So that I'm very blessed to have that, to love what you do. And it's just dealing with those other bits, like I said, that aren't as they're not a bed of roses as people, think it is. The traveling, as you well know, is not as glamorous, anywhere near as glamorous as what is seen. Oh, you're off to that country, you're off to, the nice hotel and all these things. It's not always as glamorous as it seems. But yeah, it's, I wouldn't be doing it for the time I've been doing it if I didn't love it.
You mentioned something earlier, the Commonwealth Games and that experience. Obviously, LA is on the horizon.
Yeah.
For all the players on the circuit at the minute, it's probably the ambition at the very top of their ladder. Is there an ambition there for you as well to be the voice behind squash? Well, Olympic debut?
Of course, I would love to be involved. I mean, doing those Commonwealth Games, which at that point, before the Olympics, was the so-called pinnacle of. Bearing in mind, it's only the commentary that goes out. You're not doing your studio work. It's just the commentary that goes out. And it's a very kind of raw format of, not raw format's the wrong description, but you just hit your marks and it's just the commentary on the matches. There's no other extras that go out from when we've done the Commonwealth Games, but you're on a platform that has got the reach of, way beyond Squash TV with that. Commonwealth Games obviously is now defunct, but the Olympics, I'd love to be involved. Of course, I'd love to be involved in that, and hopefully I will be. And I'm very excited that it's where it is. I mean, I'm a movie maniac, and I just can't believe it's there. And it's when the stars align, fingers crossed, it will work out. But I'm really excited about that. I think I have got no. Depending on how it works, because it's very complicated with the kind of Olympic broadcast, and then you've got host broadcasts. If the right situation is worked out, because just going back to putting people in the picture, we've got these freelancers that are doing these squash events day in, day out, that do other sports at the highest of level. They know how to film squash. So the Commonwealth Games, you'll have a few of them, but then loads of random cameramen and people that have never seen squash. So they're meant to be filming something they don't know anything about, but you've got so many of them, you kind of get away with it. Whereas that's why we're able to do what we do with the crew that we have, because they are so tuned into the game and they love what they're doing with it, and they come back every tournament to do it. So if we get the mix of that crew of people doing it and some extras, then the showcase of squash will be, I'm not worried about that at all. I'm not worried about the level of the squash. I'm not worried about how it will look. That will look amazing, it'll be very, very cool.
And I guess if you can't be there on court competing to be the man to lift the gold medal, the next best thing is being the voice that announces it.
Well, talking about it, yeah. I mean, that'd be, doing the medal ceremony at Birmingham when Paul and Joel had a great final, and Gina winning in the women's. I mean, it's very cool. And again, that kind of goes back to me watching all the athletics and the Olympics and all those things as growing up, watching all those sporting things. It's very, very cool to hear those voices doing that and being part of that. When James Allstrop won the Commonwealth Games in the Gold Coast, and I again was fortunate enough to be commentating on him. It was his first gold medal, because he'd lost out in the singles to Nick Matthew on so many occasions, and I was incredibly emotional. You could hear it in the voice, and he had a great game with Paul Cole there, and he got the gold, and it was it's a memory that I'll always cherish. That was pretty special, to be fair. So I hope to be there. I hope so.
Well, we wait and see.
We'll wait and see. Yeah.
Thank you very much for taking a bit of time today to chat all things squash, and best of luck for the rest of this season and the seasons coming forward, Joey.
Thank you, Nath. Yeah, it's been great. Lovely to catch up and chat about those things and bring back some memories.
Hopefully some good ones.
Some good ones, yeah.
Maybe a few bad ones too.